Book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Proof of Conspiracy, How Trump's International Collusion is Threatening American Democracy by Seth Abramson. This is from the introduction. In late 2015, after Donald Trump has formally announced his candidacy for president, a geopolitical conspiracy emerges overseas, whose key participants are the leaders of Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. These 6 men decide that Trump is the antidote to their ills. For Russia, U.S. sanctions. For Israel, the lack of Arab allies. For Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, perceived threats emanating from Iran. The conspirators commit themselves to doing whatever is necessary to ensure that Donald Trump is elected. Trump's presidential campaign is aware of and benefits from this conspiracy both before and after the 2016 election. On March 19, 2018, British journalist David Hurst, the former chief foreign leader writer for The Guardian, publishes the most important report of his career. Hurst, at one time the Moscow bureau chief at The Guardian, is now editor-in-chief of his own publishing venture, a London-based Middle East watchdog called the Middle East Eye. In the spring of 2018, he reports the existence of a years-long, continent-spanning conspiracy that will eventually envelop the President of the United States. The Red Sea Conspiracy. This book denominates the conspiracy Hurst uncovers as the Red Sea Conspiracy for the simple reason that it is hatched on a yacht in the middle of the Red Sea, a seawater inlet of the Indian Ocean bordered by, among other countries, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. One imagines that in his many years as a correspondent and commentator for The Scotsman, The Huffington Post, Al Jazeera, El Arabi, El Jaid, TRT World, which is Turkish, Masr al-Aghan, Egypt, and The Guardian, Hurst never thought he'd stumble on a story as far-reaching in its implications as the Red Sea Conspiracy. But he did, and what he found could change the course of history. This book chronicles the events around the globe that preceded and followed the fall 2015 origin of the conspiracy, with a special focus on how the conspiracy prompted Donald Trump and his aides, allies, and associates to covertly collude with 6 countries, both before and after the 2016 presidential election: Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Bahrain, and Egypt. Events that began on the Red Sea in 2015 now influence President Trump's foreign policy toward all of these countries, toward other countries not involved in the conspiracy, such as Qatar and Iran, and more broadly toward Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The story of the Red Sea Conspiracy begins with a man named George Nader. As reported by Hurst in the Middle East Eye, toward the end of 2015, Nader, then an advisor to the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, known as MBZ, convened, with his patron's permission, a summit of some of the Middle East's most powerful leaders. Gathered on a boat in the Red Sea in the fall of 2015 were Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who would shortly become the heir apparent to the throne of the Saudi kingdom; MZB himself, by 2015 the de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates; Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the president of Egypt; Prince Salman bin Hamad, the Crown Prince of Bahrain; and King Abdullah II of Jordan. Nader, the improbable maestro of these rulers' clandestine get-together, intended the plan he posed to the men to include the nation of Libya, but no representative from that nation attended the gathering. Of the leaders aboard the yacht, 2, MBS and MBZ, are already close. According to a New Yorker interview with Richard A. Clarke, a counterterrorism advisor to Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, MBS and MBZ, quote, talk on the phone all day to each other, end quote. The Red Sea meeting, although technically convened by Nader, is a means for MBZ to advance ambitions that he and MBS have designed together. The 2 Sunni Arab leaders' intention, Hurst records, is to remake the Middle East with the covert assistance of a highly placed American politician. They intend to do this by first renaming and reconstituting the membership of the 6-member Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, which in 2015 comprises Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar, while reorienting, too, its regional ambitions and global alliances. The proposed GCC realignment would evict Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar from the Council and replace these three countries with Egypt, Jordan, and Libya, thereby eliminating the entity's historical association with the Persian Gulf and remaking it as, instead, an alliance constituting, quote, an elite regional group of 6 countries which would supplant the GCC and form the nucleus of a coalition of pro-U.S. and pro-Israeli states in the Middle East, end quote. According to 2 sources briefed on the 2015 Red Sea Summit, quote, Nader said this group of states could become a force in the region that the United States government could depend on to counter the influence of Turkey and Iran, end quote. Prior to 2015, Turkey and Saudi Arabia had intermittently enjoyed strong diplomatic ties. The book Proof of Conspiracy by Seth Abramson.
Program.
And greetings from the city on the bay, San Francisco. Sean, I'm getting audio back into my ear with a delay. I'm broadcasting live from AM 910 iHeartRadio here in San Francisco. And it's a beautiful day in San Francisco. And, there is so much in the news. In our third hour, Dr. Justin Frank is going to drop by. He is the psychiatrist in Washington, D.C., professor of psychiatry at the George Washington School of Medicine and George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and, works at the big hospital there and stuff. And he's written a bunch of books, Bush on the Couch, Obama on the Couch, and Trump on the Couch. And I want to get into the psychology of authoritarianism, because what I'm seeing, and of bullying, frankly. Mike Bloomberg came out with an ad over the weekend portraying Donald Trump as a bully, and does a very good job of it. Now there is this debate, as it were, about whether, what is the price of taking on Mike Bloomberg, right? And because of all the people vying for the Democratic nomination, of all the candidates on the Democratic side, the only one who's actually called out Mike Bloomberg specifically by name and attacked him, I guess would be the phrase, is Bernie Sanders. And so Bloomberg came out with an anti-Bernie Sanders ad today, which actually isn't against Bernie Sanders, it's against the people who follow Bernie Sanders. And, attacking them as bullies. I saw the same thing on CNN this morning in my hotel room. With this woman from the Hotel Workers Union. And again, she wasn't attacking Bernie. She was attacking Bernie's followers. And I'm like, really? Trump's followers are literally Nazis? They go in the streets with swastikas and tiki torches and wave them around and shout, Jews will not replace us, you will not replace us. And by the way, when they're saying Jews will not replace us, they're not talking about Jews taking their place. What they were talking about was George Soros and other Jewish financiers. Now Mike Bloomberg is probably going to be in that category. And if either he or Bernie are president, that would be our first Jewish president. But in any case, what they're saying is that Jews, the international Jewish conspiracy, this is like the core ancient anti-Semitic trope, right? That the Jews control the money and that they're, doing all this. And it's evil, this story. And when they say Jews will not replace us, what they're saying is Jewish people, Jewish philanthropists funding charities that empower Hispanic and African Americans, in other words, plurality, diversity. They're saying that they will not be replaced by African Americans via organizations that are assisted with financial help from George Soros. All you have to do is read their literature, and it's all over their websites and everything else. So it wasn't that they were saying, some Jew is going to take my job, some Jewish person. No, that's not what they were saying. And these are the followers of Donald Trump. And what's the news today all over the place, wall to wall and all weekend? Bernie's followers are evil. They're bad people. They are tough. They are bullies. They are loud. They are obnoxious. They're in our face. Come on. Give me a break. You've got probably two or three things going on. Number one, certainly, Bernie has more support among younger people than any of the candidates. I mean, let's just acknowledge that. And young people very often are a lot less inhibited than older people. I mean, I certainly was when I was a teenager and in my 20s. And that lack of inhibition leads people to do and say things that might, be offensive to somebody in their 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever. But the straightforward reality is that you can't. Well, you can't hold somebody, a candidate to account for their followers. And frankly, I've never seen the media aggressively try to hold Donald Trump to account for his followers, for the way that they behave. I mean, the people, even at his rallies, people, shouting at the media, giving them the finger, threatening them, pointing, their hands at them like, in a gun motion, like I'm going to shoot you. I mean, this is the normal stuff that the press experiences at Trump rallies. And it's not the big story, but Bernie's got some people who say some nasty things. So there's that one thing is the people who are really passionate. And what Bernie's saying about this, and I agree, is that if you want to win a presidential election, you need to have passionate people. That's why Trump is out there doing these rallies, aside from the fact that they feed his ego. Is you got to crank people up. You got to get your side excited. You got to get them, really going and thinking, yeah, this is my place. And without that, you lose elections. I mean, Mark Pocan pointed out on this show, 200,000 fewer Democrats showed up to vote in Wisconsin in 2016 than had in 2012. Why? They were passionate about Barack Obama, not so much about Hillary Clinton. And the exit polls showed that. I would add to that, by the way, that Scott Walker had purged a couple 100,000 people from the voting rolls in Wisconsin. And, now they've got a voter ID law, and all those things are going to suppress the vote, particularly in poor and urban areas where there are more people of color. But anyhow, so back to this thing, the question is what is going to be involved in taking on Bloomberg? And at the next debate, Bloomberg may qualify because the Democratic Party changed the rules so you don't have to have a certain number of donors, you just have to hit a certain point in the polls. And so we'll see. I mean, but Michael Bloomberg bites back. And whether this is going to hurt Bernie or not, I just don't know. It might just energize his followers. And then we have this kind of internecine warfare where the Bloomberg supporters and the Bernie supporters are going to war, and that's not something we need inside the Democratic Party, frankly. So we'll see. A new study, by the way, speaking of Bernie, he just sent out a major press release about this huge study from The Lancet. The Lancet is the British medical journal. It's like the Journal of the American Medical Association, only it's not associated with a group. But it's the top medical journal in England and arguably one of the top ones in the world. And they did an analysis of Medicare for All in the United States. And this is Bernie's comment about it. He says, this study confirms that Medicare for All will save the American people $450 billion in health care costs and prevent 68,000 unnecessary deaths each and every year. In other words, guaranteeing health care as a human right by creating a Medicare for All system will cost substantially less than our current dysfunctional health care system. It will save working families thousands of dollars every year, and it will prevent tens of thousands of Americans from dying each year. While the CEOs of the pharmaceutical and health industry may not like it, we will end their greed and enact Medicare when I am president. By the way, if you're in San Francisco or Berkeley, I'll be tonight at the Berkeley Arts and Letters, whatever they call this thing, the speaking thing venue. It's at the Hillside Club, 2286 Cedar Street in Berkeley. There are tickets available. We were sold out in Los Angeles at KPFK. I know there's more than 800 people have bought tickets for Seattle, which is Wednesday night. But there's still tickets available for Berkeley. And you can get that, you can find all that stuff over at thomhartmann.com. If you want to drop by, get a book signed, bring your books with you, your older books, if you want them signed. People do that a lot. So anyhow, we'll continue. I want to get into oligarchy and tyranny.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I've got Bill Barr news, and I've got, just an amazing story out of Munich. Lots more. Stick around. And welcome back. And Vic in Stockton, California. Hey, Vic, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I have an idea that, if you implement this as a campaign, might just put some sand into the Republican socialist propaganda machine. This is what I'd like your feedback on. I'll take your comments off the air. So this is what I'm thinking. Have as many Republicans, especially in the Senate, give their definition of socialism and put that in the public record. Now, they'll only say that socialism is a path to communism or a centralized means of production. And they will never deviate from that definition because other definitions of socialism have too many positive attributes. Right. That's when we get together as progressives. But when we take over and make all Republican definitions public, the end result is that the Republican Party will lose credibility. And social democracies in the Nordic countries have the happiest people in the world, and the UK's NHS is very popular. So whatever Republicans say about socialism, they lose. Thanks, Tom. I'll take your comments off the air.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, Vic. I'm personally of the opinion that even though the Republicans are going to be throwing the word socialism out all the time, the Democrats should just largely ignore it. It's a word that among people over 50 has generally, broadly speaking, a negative connotation, with the exception of some of the boomers who were lefties back in the 60s and 70s, like myself, and it has a very positive connotation with people under 30. In fact, the last study that was done of millennials was that more millennials prefer socialism as not just an economic system, but a governance system than capitalism, and so it's like, well, capitalism isn't really a governance system. Socialism can either be an economic system or a governance system. So anyhow, Janice in Englewood, Colorado. Hey, Janice, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. I went to the Bernie rally last night in Denver. There were 11,400 people there. Bernie and Joe Salazar were both really good, but Emily Sirota was fabulous.
Oh, David's wife?
Yes.
Wow. Is she, now, she ran for office. Did she win?
She's a state representative.
That's great. That's great. I remember when that campaign was going on, and David told me about it, and I think we had her on the show. I'm not sure, but I was supportive of that, and so glad to hear that she made it, and so great. Thank you.
She was fabulous last night. I got to tell you, she was just fabulous.
Great. Well, onward and upward. Janice, thank you for the call. Ken in Lafayette, Colorado. Hey, Ken, what's on your mind today?
Hi, good morning, Tom. Real quick, I, too, was at the Bernie rally last night, and good turnout. One thing I wanted to comment on is that the Democrats as a whole need to stop bashing each other and bash Trump for everything that he's done, to make sure that is the reason why we're all out here. We all have differences. Personally, I'm pulling for Amy Klobuchar, but I attended Bernie's rally to support blue no matter who. Very important.
There you go. And I'm guessing that Bernie wasn't bashing any Democrats, that he was going after Trump, right?
He did put a jibe into Bloomberg, but generally speaking, he did point out a lot of Trump's fault. But it's important to vote no matter who.
Amen. Thank you, Ken. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There's Robert Reich wrote a fascinating piece. I'm reading it over on Alternet, but I'm guessing most people are seeing it on Robert Reich whatever it is, his blog, his website. And he's talking about oligarchy and tyranny. And there are distinctions we need to make here. There's that book On Tyranny by Timothy, whatever his last name is, that Rachel quotes, and I read parts of it on the air a year and a half, 2 years ago when it came out. In fact, he was on our show. And tyranny is basically, when you lose all your freedoms. Oligarchy is when your government and by extension your economy are run of, by, and for rich people. Now, I would argue that we have been in an era of oligarchy ever since the Reagan administration. That oligarchy was what the Reagan administration was trying to turn us into, and that we have, with every successive presidency, Democratic or Republican, ever since Reagan completely changed the economic and political system of America, left behind Keynesian economics and readopted Warren Harding's horse and sparrow economics, renaming it trickle-down economics, that basically, we've become an oligarchy. We know from the study that Gillens and Page did at Princeton and Northwestern universities that the political desires of the bottom 90% are as likely to turn into legislation as random noise, and in many cases less likely than random noise, whereas the desires of the top 1% are very likely to be made into legislation, and the desires of the top 10% are somewhat likely. So, far more than 50%. So, I think by most definitions, that's considered oligarchy. And yet Americans so far have been kind of, well, I guess this is okay. Although I think, frankly, I think that a lot of the blowback and backlash and whatnot, whatever you want to call it, that has led to Donald Trump being in the White House right now, really came out of this sense that people have that the government is not responding to what they want. The government is ignoring their needs and desires. And, when George W. Bush basically cut long-term unemployment down to just 1 year, and then Donald Trump cut it even shorter than that. When Bill Clinton block granted half a dozen different welfare programs so that the states could cut them and put all kinds of work requirements and other things like this onto them. And then Bush tightened the screws even further on that so that when the Great Recession happened, those programs, that social safety net that Lyndon Johnson, the great Democratic president, had, with the Great Society had built, that those programs were literally no longer there, or they were time limited, or they were radically cut back in terms of how generous the benefits were, so people were just living on the edge. And now we've got this massive homelessness problem all across the United States, and I attribute a lot of it to the end of welfare as we know it, which wasn't some evil plot by Bill Clinton. This was Newt Gingrich's thing. It came out of the Reagan Revolution. Clinton just went along with it and decided hey, it's kind of popular, I'll take credit for it. But this is oligarchy. But the shift that has happened, and I think this is really consequential, this is the danger of oligarchy. With oligarchy, power concentrates along with wealth. Political power and wealth become essentially synonymous. And this was not the case during the era from the 1930s to the 1980s. During that period of time, rich people were actually getting richer more slowly than working class people. Working class people were building wealth more rapidly than the top 1% or 5% or 10% during that period from 1930 to 1980. And the outcome of that was we built the modern middle class. Over 60% of Americans became middle class. which meant, one person working could raise a family, put your kids through college, buy a new car every couple of years, take a vacation every year. The life that my dad had working at a tool and die shop, at a union tool and die shop. Well, Reagan blew all that up. And last year we slipped, the American middle class, we slipped below 50%. Fewer than half of us are in the middle class now, which is just an obscene tragedy. But anyhow, so that's how oligarchy works. But here's what's happened in the last 3 years. We have this oligarch, Donald Trump, this billionaire, who was put into power with the help largely of a couple of other oligarchs, Shelley Adelson, whose only agenda has to do with Israel and all that stuff, and he funded Trump big time, the Las Vegas casino guy, and Robert Mercer and his wife and his daughter Rebecca, who billionaires, Wall Street billionaires, and they put all this money behind Trump, and of course Trump loaned his own campaign a couple, millions and millions of dollars. I don't remember if it was hundreds or just tens, but so we ended up again with an oligarch, right? And rather than just representatives of oligarchy, rather than just politicians who are willing to suck up to oligarchs, we've had two oligarchic presidents in the since 2000. George W. Bush was an oligarch. His family is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, compounds all over the country, investments all around the world. And now we've got Donald Trump, who asserts that he's a billionaire. But Trump wasn't just an oligarch, or isn't just an oligarch. He's also a tyrant. And he is shifting our government out of oligarchy. I mean, again, we left democracy behind in 1981, out of oligarchy and into tyranny. And this is the argument that Robert Reich is making, and he's putting it in the context of Michael Bloomberg being an oligarch. I remember when Ralph Nader wrote his book, Only the Super Rich Can Save Us Now. And what he was saying basically was, the Supreme Court in 1976 with the Buckley case, and then 2010 with Citizens United, basically said billionaires can buy the political system. And now they are.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So I'm curious your thoughts on oligarchy and on tyranny and how this all plays out and how we should be responding to it. I'll share my thoughts as well. Single payer. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms, in our fields, our streets, and our sewers, our bodies, and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until, at last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming, and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Health care is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy.
It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate healthcare has convinced us that some people deserve healthcare and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer healthcare, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest health care program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single-payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are healthcare. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer healthcare is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18 and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Tyrone in Harlem, New York. You're going to talk about the third aspect, and I never got to that. I had it in my mind, but in my rant, I never got to that. The third aspect of why it may appear that some Bernie supporters are kind of out on the edge there in ways that Michael Bloomberg can attack. Go for it, Tyrone.
Absolutely, because Trump supporters and the Republican Party, we have to understand that they will cheat to win. And they will say they're Bernie supporters, knowing that they are Trump supporters. And Trump even said to them, go into South Carolina and vote for the candidate that you think may lose or win, someone that's a Democratic runner running for the candidacy, and just mess up the whole system with what they're doing. They did that in Iowa with calling the sites and jamming up the phones. These people are doing whatever they can to mess up the democratic process, and we need to put our thinking caps on.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Tyrone. And on my own Twitter feed, over the last couple of weeks in particular, it's gotten really intense in the last 2 weeks. I've had probably several dozen people come in and behave like they're Bernie supporters, but just viciously trash other candidates. And so I click on it and I look at their profile, and they've been members for like 2 months, and they've got 35 followers, and they've made 200 tweets or something like that. And I'm like, these are bots, or these are intentional trolls, phony troll accounts, and I block them or mute them. But and so A, you've got passionate supporters, but B, you've got bots and trolls out there, and Michael Bloomberg needs to acknowledge that as well. Thanks a lot for the call. Great to hear from you, Tyrone. Valerie in Dallas, Texas. Hey, Valerie, what's on your mind?
Hi. I just want to say that, we've been dealing with oligarchical influence from the beginning. I mean, it really was a very short period of time, from FDR to Reagan, where there was any kind of improvement in this. And this was because of the terrible Gilded Age. How horrible that really was for this world, and especially for the United States. But I'm not so negative. I believe that we can vote ourselves out of this, and I think I really deplore the negativity that is surrounding this. Oh, it's the end of the world, blah blah blah. Well, I'm worried about the end of the world because of climate change, but I really do believe that if we concentrate on getting people to be able to vote, to get rid of voter suppression, to renew the Voting Rights Act, I think it's going to. I think there's truly more of us than them. And
yes.
I think
well, that's why they're having to suppress the vote in order to win elections.
Right, and I'll tell you, I'm a proponent of Rachel Weitkofer's ideas, which is that there is no such thing as a swing voter. That in fact the electorate changes in each voting cycle. It's just people who voted before don't vote this time, and that's why we it turned around. 2010, the Tea Party rose to power because people who had voted for Obama didn't vote in the midterms. People who we have this cycle, but I really honestly believe there's more of us than them, and there will always be more of us than them. And
yes. Although that was true in the 1930s in Germany, Valerie, there were more good people in Germany than there were Nazis.
I know. I'm not saying we should ignore this, but also this person that's squatting in the White House is a very bad tyrant. And I mean, not bad, but I mean, just like he's not even clever. At least Putin is clever. A lot of these people were actually clever. They weren't just evil. They were actually evilly clever as well. And this man is not. He is a failure on every level.
But he's got clever people around him.
Well, he has
Bill Barr,
he has
for
people
example.
who are in. Well, yeah, but Barr. I really believe that an evil exposed is an evil that can be dealt with. I really do believe that. I really wish that people wouldn't be so. Oh, it's the end of the earth. No, it's not.
Yeah.
And as far as the oligarchs, the super rich of this world are their idea of their survival is to become Westworld. They want to become drift into a a computer and just continue their existence. If you've ever read Survival,
seen that movie or book or whatever it is. I don't understand what you mean.
Well, it's actually interesting. But if you read, there's a book. There's I can't remember the guy's name, but it's called Survival of the Richest. And it's an article he wrote because he was invited to give a lecture on technology to these super rich people, and there was literally only 5 people in the room. And their idea is when the event happens, when we rebel against the tyranny, they want to be able to fly to New Zealand and go to their compound and wait out the event. And they don't even consider themselves part of the human race anymore. That's how far away Bezos and all of these incredibly rich people are. They don't even consider themselves, they think the human race is done, and they don't want to be part of it anymore. So,
amazing.
I mean, you can be
Valerie,
really negative and think.
Yeah. And thank you for injecting a note of optimism. So every now and then I wander a little too far, down that dark road, because I personally believe. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I want to say Robert Reich is the one who actually did a whole list of stuff saying, stop being so negative. Don't mention that jerk's name that's in the White House. Don't even mention his name. Just use a euphemism. And on and on. But this negativity is not going to help people get out to vote.
Yeah, I'm in. I'm in. Valerie, thank you for the call. It's great. It's great to hear from you. I really appreciate it. And Valerie's point is so well made. This country has survived a civil war, literally a civil war. Most countries don't survive civil wars, or at least their form of government doesn't survive the civil war. And yes, there was actually a change in our form of government for the better, which is extremely unusual after civil wars. Look at what happened after, civil wars in Sudan, in South Sudan, or in Egypt, or go back and look at history. It's fascinating. The next book in this Hidden History series that I'm writing, I'm on the road right now for the Hidden History of the War on Voting, but every 6 months we're going to be releasing a new book, and which keeps me writing all afternoon, every day, and all weekends. And the next one's on, not the next one coming out, the next one coming out is on monopolies, which is business oligarchy. But after that, it's going to be political oligarchy and tyranny. And that's the book that will be coming out right around the time of let's see, when will that be? It'll be, I guess, spring of 2021. But in any case, we have been through so many things here in the United States. And if you look back at the Civil War, what happened was that because of the invention of the cotton gin in 1797, by 1815 or thereabouts, because a cotton gin could clean cotton, as in 1 hour it could clean as much cotton as 50 enslaved people. And so what this did was it allowed the big plantations to far more efficiently produce cotton and make a pile more money. And they started buying up all the smaller plantations. And, this is just like the agricultural systems in the United States, where ConAgra and all these big ag companies are buying up family farms and then having the family farmers be basically tenant farmers, kind of sharecroppers. And that's what happened in the South from 1815 until the 1860s. And what rose in the South was an oligarchy. It was a firmly established oligarchy. And for black people and poor people, it was also a tyranny. And the Civil War was not a war between the North and the South. It was a war between the North that was still holding to values that we would call the values of a democratic republic, and the South that had become a full-blown oligarchy, a completely different system of government. And each one of the southern states, these plantations had gotten huge. They had turned into industries. Their oligarchs, their owners were all of the state senators and the elected representatives and the U.S. senators from those states. They were very, very, very mind-bogglingly wealthy people. And so what we saw with the Civil War, and it's an amazing story, actually. There's a book about this called From Oligarchy to Republicanism by a fellow whose last name is Nabors, Nabors. And it is a shocking revelation that part of America actually slid into oligarchy. We fought a civil war over it. We came back from that. We tried to push back against emerging oligarchy again in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Teddy Roosevelt stood up against it. Franklin Roosevelt stood up against it. We have been to hell and back as a country, and we keep bouncing back because we have this idea that came out of the Enlightenment, out of the 1600s and the 1700s, that people can actually govern themselves. And as long as we hold that...
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls. Stick around. And welcome back. Samantha in Akron, Ohio. Hey, Samantha. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
How are you?
I'm well. What's on your mind?
Okay. I hope I don't sound stupid saying this, but one of the things I wanted to bring up, this coming May will be the 50th anniversary of the shootings at Kent State. Mm-hmm. And the way the country is now, everybody's so ticked off and mad and everything else. It really is in the back of my head that something like that could happen again.
Right.
You know?
Well, I think you could argue that Heather Heyer's murder at that Tiki Torch, parade or rally, that pseudo-Trump rally, was a variation on that, although they weren't agents of the state. I mean, this was actually the U.S., the Ohio National Guard that did that. And this is what oligarchs who become tyrants do. And what year was Kent State? If it was 50 years, it must have been 1970. Right?
1970, yeah. No, 1970.
So who was president? Nixon was president then, right?
Yeah, he was president, and I had one of my sociology professors was one of the only faculty member to be arrested for protesting, and he was a great guy. But anyway, we had I knew people that were in the Guard, and my mother was up there, running around with Joe Walsh, so she saw all of it, and it's just people like young kids today, just they have no concept of what that was, or what that could be, and it's just decisive. If everybody is now and hating people and having Donald Trump spewing all of that garbage just makes it worse.
Well, I can tell you that, I remember that era. I was arrested several times myself, and we lived in fear. And I'd been tear gassed as well, or actually it was nerve gas of some kind. It just made you feel like you were on fire. And there are among us now people who absolutely understand what those of us who lived through the 60s and early 70s lived through, that America has the capability of shifting into police state mode very quickly. And that's the African American community. Now increasingly in the age of ICE. Now you've got, Trump having ICE guys going into sanctuary cities in tanks, in half-tracks, in armored vehicles, with SWAT teams going into sanctuary cities looking for people. The Hispanic community. I mean, the militarization and terrorization of people in the United States is moving along just full tilt boogie. So, Samantha, thank you for the call. That said, as I believe it was Valerie said earlier, we still have that germ of freedom. We still hold to that value, and I think we can come back to it. It's 49 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls, and I'm broadcasting live from San Francisco. Stick around. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Thom Hartmann here with you, broadcasting live from iHeartRadio's AM 910 in San Francisco. Tonight I will be speaking in Berkeley. When I lived here, we used to call it Berkeley. That was 1968. But in any case, I'll be speaking in Berkeley at the Hillside Club, which is at 2286 Cedar Street in Berkeley. You can buy tickets at the door, or you can find links to the place that has the tickets over at thomhartmann.com. It's right up at the top of the page. And day after tomorrow, Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. at Seattle Town Hall, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal will be joining me, and I'll give a little riff about the hidden history of the war on voting, and she'll be giving a little riff about whatever she wants to talk about, and the two of us are going to engage in a dialogue, or at least that's our plan. I mean, all plans are subject to change once events start rolling, but that's going to be a lot of fun. So if you're in Seattle, I believe that there are still tickets available for that. I think the venue holds 1,000, and they've already sold about in the neighborhood of 800. So you might want to check that out. So that's what we're up to. Is oligarchy better than tyranny? I mean, that was Robert Reich's piece. I would take it a step beyond that, and I would say oligarchy typically leads to tyranny. That was the story of the Roman Republic. That was the story of Augustus, the last Roman emperor who became an absolute tyrant, although there had been ones prior to him that, did their damn best. So anyway, let's see here. Robbie in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Robbie, what's on your mind?
Hey, well, a lot of stuff came up that I wanted to talk about now, but I was originally calling about the Mike Bloomberg stuff. But I wanted to answer one of your. I was an activist with Occupy Wall Street. I had police butt dialing me, and I would pick up my phone from 100 long digit cell phone number, and I could hear inside a cop car. I don't know. Black Lives Matter. There are activists who ended up dead. They were shot in the back of the head and burned in a cop car. Every time that the Nazis come down here to Portland, the police presence is very overwhelming, and they have ATF planes, I believe they are, with the Stingrays. But basically, I am aware of what they are. I think of the American public. It's very sad because my mom one day had called me, and she was so scared because when Occupy Wall Street was going full force, I was jumping from Occupy Oakland to Occupy Tucson to Occupy Phoenix, Occupy LA. I'd hit all those, and I was networking, and it was very obvious that my phone was indeed tapped. You could hear it recording. I could hear myself speaking sometimes when I would call certain people, and to the point that I actually moved to Portland was because my mom had called me one day and she said, "Robbie, I think your phone's tapped." She knew I was doing all this activist work, and to hear the fear in her voice, that made me move to Oregon, actually, because when I was in Arizona at that time, I stuck out a lot more. And then moving to San Francisco and eventually Portland, I didn't stick out as much. But that is a very real thing. And that's what your point is. One thing that you had said is this is our last chance, which is why I'm so, vocal, which is going to bring me into my next point about Mike Bloomberg attacking Senator Sanders' supporters, which is me, because I look at Senator Sanders as the only hope. He is the only person with the consistent track record, doesn't lie, doesn't give us stories. He gives us what we want, and we're watching it being shut down. But to the extent that Mike Bloomberg is, attacking the supporters, that's all they have against Sanders. And I was actually on Reddit when a lot of this was going on, which the reason that these attacks from Mike Bloomberg's campaign onto Sanders happened is because what Sanders supporters did. They infiltrated Mike Bloomberg's campaign, and they started making phone calls for Mike Bloomberg supporters, trying to, get poll numbers, trying to get them to donate money. And then what they started doing is they started bringing up, oh, did you know that there was 44 sexual harassment allegations against Mike Bloomberg? Oh, did you know that his racist policies for stop and frisk didn't just end there? It was actually donating money.
That's dirty pool, Robbie. You don't pretend to be somebody in order to put that message out. You just put that message out.
These are facts. But no, hang on. Let me finish my point, though, just because the thing is these people didn't know about this. These people didn't know, Tom. And back 9 months ago, when you'd get on my case for, I don't know, circle firing squad Joe Biden, or what was the matter with the Warren, it's like these are facts that are not getting out to these Democratic voters, Tom. So that is how we are combating the Bernie blindness. That is how we are combating Mike Bloomberg being able to do his buying off of, whatever media things that he can. So that's where I'm against you, because I'm for the
it's starting to bleed into the media. Now that Bloomberg is starting to climb in the polls and everybody's realizing that there's a very real possibility that this guy could basically buy the election. I've seen articles I'm talking about mainstream. I'm talking about Washington Post and New York Times just over the weekend about Mike Bloomberg's history of sexist and vulgar comments, to his own employees that they're complaining about. Other people I get that, and I don't consider pointing out stuff like that is real and in the news to be the circular firing squad. And Bloomberg is going to have to figure out how to reconcile this. And I'm guessing he's going to do the same thing he did with stop and frisk. He's going to say, it was a different time, and I'm really sorry, and let's move forward. And people will either do that or they won't. We'll see. But it's going to be an uphill climb for him. And I'm with you, Robbie, on Bernie, although I would say he's not the only progressive in the race. I think he's the one who's got the largest base, the most fervent supporters, therefore the most likely to win the election, because elections are are won or lost based on the base, how much you can turn people out. Megan in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Megan, what's up? Oh, Megan, I just got a cue from Sean. We're about to hit the break, so I'm going to put you on hold here, and we'll get back to you in the next hour. I'm going to continue this conversation. I want to add a few things to it. Bill Barr and a little more. There is a lot in the news, even though it's President's Day. It's a holiday. I'm broadcasting live today from San Francisco. I'll be in Berkeley tonight at the Hillside Club on Cedar Street in Berkeley, and you can get more information over at thomhartmann.com or pick up tickets at the door.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Proof of Conspiracy, How Trump's International Collusion is Threatening American Democracy by Seth Abramson. This is from the introduction. In late 2015, after Donald Trump has formally announced his candidacy for president, a geopolitical conspiracy emerges overseas, whose key participants are the leaders of Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. These 6 men decide that Trump is the antidote to their ills. For Russia, U.S. sanctions. For Israel, the lack of Arab allies. For Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, perceived threats emanating from Iran. The conspirators commit themselves to doing whatever is necessary to ensure that Donald Trump is elected. Trump's presidential campaign is aware of and benefits from this conspiracy both before and after the 2016 election. On March 19, 2018, British journalist David Hurst, the former chief foreign leader writer for The Guardian, publishes the most important report of his career. Hurst, at one time the Moscow bureau chief at The Guardian, is now editor-in-chief of his own publishing venture, a London-based Middle East watchdog called the Middle East Eye. In the spring of 2018, he reports the existence of a years-long, continent-spanning conspiracy that will eventually envelop the President of the United States, the Red Sea conspiracy. This book denominates the conspiracy Hurst uncovers as the Red Sea conspiracy for the simple reason that it is hatched on a yacht in the middle of the Red Sea, a seawater inlet of the Indian Ocean bordered by, among other countries, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. One imagines that in his many years as a correspondent and commentator for The Scotsman, The Huffington Post, Al Jazeera, El Arabi, Al Jaid, TRT World, which is Turkish, Masr al-Aghan, Egypt, and The Guardian, Hurst never thought he'd stumble on a story as far-reaching in its implications as the Red Sea conspiracy. But he did, and what he found could change the course of history. This book chronicles the events around the globe that preceded and followed the fall 2015 origin of the conspiracy, with a special focus on how the conspiracy prompted Donald Trump and his aides, allies, and associates to covertly collude with 6 countries, both before and after the 2016 presidential election: Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Bahrain, and Egypt. Events that began on the Red Sea in 2015 now influence President Trump's foreign policy toward all of these countries, toward other countries not involved in the conspiracy, such as Qatar and Iran, and more broadly toward Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The story of the Red Sea conspiracy begins with a man named George Nader. As reported by Hurst in the Middle East Eye, toward the end of 2015, Nader, then an advisor to the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, known as MBZ, convened, with his patron's permission, a summit of some of the Middle East's most powerful leaders. Gathered on a boat in the Red Sea in the fall of 2015 were Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who would shortly become the heir apparent to the throne of the Saudi kingdom; MZB himself, by 2015 the de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates; Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the president of Egypt; Prince Salman bin Hamad, the Crown Prince of Bahrain; and King Abdullah II of Jordan. Nader, the improbable maestro of these rulers' clandestine get-together, intended the plan he posed to the men to include the nation of Libya, but no representative from that nation attended the gathering. Of the leaders aboard the yacht, 2, MBS and MBZ, are already close. According to a New Yorker interview with Richard A. Clarke, a counterterrorism advisor to Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, MBS and MBZ, quote, talk on the phone all day to each other, end quote. The Red Sea meeting, although technically convened by Nader, is a means for MBZ to advance ambitions that he and MBS have designed together. The 2 Sunni Arab leaders' intention, Hurst records, is to remake the Middle East with the covert assistance of a highly placed American politician. They intend to do this by first renaming and reconstituting the membership of the 6-member Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, which in 2015 comprises Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar, while reorienting, too, its regional ambitions and global alliances. The proposed GCC realignment would evict Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar from the Council and replace these 3 countries with Egypt, Jordan, and Libya, thereby eliminating the entity's historical association with the Persian Gulf and remaking it as, instead, an alliance constituting, quote, an elite regional group of 6 countries which would supplant the GCC and form the nucleus of a coalition of pro-U.S. and pro-Israeli states in the Middle East, end quote. According to 2 sources briefed on the 2015 Red Sea Summit, quote, Nader said this group of states could become a force in the region that the United States government could depend on to counter the influence of Turkey and Iran, end quote. Prior to 2015, Turkey and Saudi Arabia had intermittently enjoyed strong diplomatic ties. The book Proof of Conspiracy by Seth Abramson. We have a special video up over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program, and it's about how a letter that the IRS sent out to 3.9 million Americans saved 700 lives. And you're like, wait a minute, the IRS saved 700 lives? How did that happen? Well, it had to do with Obamacare, and it's a fascinating story. And it turns out that this analysis of this IRS mailing was actually the first time that the federal government has done a study that actually proved that people having access to health care produces fewer deaths. For every 1,648 people who got the letter, there was one fewer premature death. I'll explain the whole thing in the video. It's you know, as I said, it's available over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and it is really worth checking out. And it's a great ad, essentially, for a national health care system. Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Over at Democratic Underground, Dennis Donovan posted a fascinating piece from his, well, it's actually a repost of Andrew Feinberg's tweet. And Dennis blew it up and put it on DU. Andrew Feinberg, he's the source of this. It's at Andrew Feinberg, Feinberg. And it's from a local attorney who went to college, went to high school and college with Bill Barr. The lawyer's name is Jimmy Lohman, Lohman. He is currently a civil rights and criminal defense attorney. He's lived in Tallahassee since 1974. This is in the local Tallahassee newspaper called the Florida Flambeau on November 18th. And which is interesting. I mean, this is from 1991. Which was about the time that Bill Barr was made Attorney General by George Herbert Walker Bush. You'll recall back in '92, Attorney General Bill Barr buried the investigation, well, the criminal prosecutions, actually. They'd already gotten 3 criminal convictions, and there were 2 more in the pipeline. Lawrence Walsh, the prosecutor, and Bill Barr went to George Herbert Walker Bush, who was president then. This was literally 3 weeks before Bill Clinton was going to be sworn into office. Clinton had already won the election. George Bush had lost the election. And Bush was desperately trying to cover up Iran-Contra because he himself didn't want to be prosecuted. And Reagan was like long into senility, but still this revealed the crimes of the Reagan administration going all the way back to the 1980 election and the deal that they cut with the Iranian government. So this is, you know, this was the first time Bill Barr kind of cycled through this, okay? So just listen to this. This is remarkable. It's titled, What Bill Barr Isn't. And Jimmy Lohman writes, I admit it. I have a personal axe to grind with Billy Barr, who is poised to be the next Attorney General of the United States. So this was, again, 1999, as George H.W. Bush was about to make Bill Barr the Attorney General, and then Bill Barr would go on to cover up 2 major scandals that Bush had been in the middle of. The so-called Iraq-Gate weapons of mass destruction scandal, where the Reagan administration was selling nerve gas and poison gas to Saddam Hussein that he was using against the Iranians in their war, and illegally, in violation of U.S. law and international law, and which William Safire was just going crazy about in the New York Times. So you had that, plus obviously Iran-Contra, the arms for hostages deal. Well, I need not recap it all. You know what I'm talking about. So he says. I have a personal axe to grind with Billy Barr. I had the misfortune of knowing the AG dude pretty well, parenthesis, a lot better than I wanted to, close parenthesis, in junior high, high school, and college. Billy was my very own high school tormentor. Now, He was the classic bully, this Mr. Lohman writes. I met Billy when I was in the 7th grade. Billy was a porky 9th grader who had a vicious fixation on my little Jewish commie ass, and in quotes. Billy and another ugly, mean porker friend of his lived to make me miserable. Combined, they weighed a good 3 times what I weighed, and they put the crunch on me every chance they get. So, I'm curious your thoughts on this. I was having a conversation with a dear friend of mine in an email yesterday. And Earl was suggesting, what is the source of bullying? What is the source of authoritarianism? Does it come out of people being abused as kids? I mean, we know that the Nazi child care manuals that during the Third Reich taught parents to beat their children. Did that produce fascism? Is it something that is learned from our culture? I remember Jack Forbes, Professor Jack Forbes. He was a professor of Native American Studies. I mentioned him last week. I read about him, there's almost a whole chapter about him in my book, The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. Jack was, or Dr. Forbes was a Native American and a full professor of Native American Studies at the University of California at Davis. And I made a pilgrimage out there to interview him for my book. And he's, and those of you who tuned in last week, you heard me telling this story. He said, when Native people, we had figured out, I mean, it probably took thousands of years for it to happen, but we had figured out how to live with each other in peace. Basically, tribal conflicts, what you would call war, only very, very rarely happened in the Americas by the time Columbus showed up. Most people were living peacefully, and they'd figured out ways to resolve these conflicts. Lacrosse, for example, the game lacrosse, was what the Iroquois Confederacy did, when there were conflicts as a way of settling conflict without war. Counting coup, we think that, counting coup is killing the enemy. No, when you drew blood from the enemy, that was the point at which you stopped the individual battle with that other person. And they were out. They were out of a game. They were bleeding. Okay, you're out. Sort of like football. You're tackled, right? You're injured. You're down. The idea of genocidal warfare was something that was completely alien to these folks. And the only times that there had been really serious warfare that involved displacing people from one place to another, the only time that happened was back in I believe it was the 600s. There was the Little Dryas. There was the Little Ice Age, or maybe it was a little later than that. Maybe it was the early 1600s. But whenever it was, when some of the Dene people, the Southern Canadian Native Americans, traveled south because the climate had changed and the summer had gotten so cold and so short that the crops were not growing. The abundance of food was going away. And as a result of that, they had to go seeking food. And they collided with the Pueblo people, the Hopi and others. And that produced some conflict. And out of that came, I believe, the Apaches and the Cherokee. But actually, I shouldn't name the tribes because I'm sure I'm screwing this one up. But you get my point. And Jack said to me, why did you guys come here and just start slaughtering us? Who does that? And he said, we call this Wetiko, this cultural mental illness, but he said, I'm beginning to wonder if it goes more than cultural. Is there something in your genes? I think that bullying and authoritarianism are temperamental. I think that we are born with a specific temperament. And throughout our lives, we express that temperament. We struggle with that temperament. Some people are very paranoid. Some people are very passive. Some people are very expressive. Some people are very introverted. Some people are very extroverted. I really think that there's a piece to this that has to do with how we're born. Now, whether it ties to ancestry and lineage and place or any of that stuff, I don't have a clue. But I've raised 3 kids, and I've known enough children, and I was one myself, to know that basically the person you are when you're 70 is pretty much the person you were when you were 8 years old. And here's Billy Barr being this bully. He says, is that the kind of person? I believe it is. I think that the authoritarians that rose to power in the Nazi movement in Germany, the authoritarians who rose to power after the Spanish Civil War with Franco, and Franco, keep in mind, persisted right up until the 70s with an authoritarian, basically fascist government in Spain. Mussolini. I think that the people who are drawn to them are people who are bullies, have been bullies all their lives, have a bully temperament, and the people who, and they themselves are. And they recognize each other. And I think that's what you're seeing at the Trump rallies, too.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I mean, how do you take on a bully? Right now, you've got Bloomberg trying to take on Trump by ridiculing him. I'm not sure that's going to work. And welcome back. Let's see here. Jerry in Auburn, Washington. Hey, Jerry, what's on your mind? Jerry? Apparently no Jerry. Okay, let's try Denise in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Denise. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I'm trying to do the despair is no option part in my political world. And
Good.
I've come up with an idea, and I think that this might do some good. Everybody has to do something, right?
Yep.
I'm writing letters to the editor of my newspaper. And the latest one I wrote, I simply started saying, I took my definitions out of the dictionary, so these cannot be argued. And I talked about socialism, democracy, fascism, dogmatism, and I didn't have to say anybody's words or anybody's names. And I'm just appealing that the letter is so well written that by the time you get done reading it, you get it. You get that social democracy is what is a good thing for America right now. Without
Can you
being
tweet it to me, Denise?
Huh?
Can you tweet it to me?
I don't have tweet, but I have Facebook. But what I want, what I'm asking all of your listeners out there to do is, if they have any talent for writing, to just write letters to the editors of their small town papers, because the elderly people without Facebook, without laptops, without phones and all that stuff, they're the ones that are the most afraid of socialism. And if we can reach them, that's just my personal mission, is to try to reach the elderly and get them not to be afraid of socialism. That's my idea.
Well, and voting rates among people over 50 are really, really high. And they go up substantially into the 60s, and then they start to go down in the 70s and 80s, and of course people start dying off too. But yeah.
I can send this to you. Can I do it on Facebook Messenger?
I don't use Facebook Messenger. I don't want Mark Zuckerberg to see my.
I've sent you stuff in the past, just sending it to Denver. Can I do that by mail? Because I'm not on tweet.
By mail, yeah. Don't send it to Denver, though. Oh, geez. Denise, we don't put out our address because we literally get death threats.
I know.
So
I know.
But
anyway, my appeal.
The only
is
thing
to
that I
people.
personally, actually, look at our website, thomhartmann.com, and there's some contact information there. You can send information via that.
But my appeal is to the people that have talent out there. Write to their local newspapers. Write to their editors. Make it simple and understandable for the elderly, so that they're not afraid of socialism.
Yeah, I'm with you. Okay, thank you, Denise. Thanks for the call. Charles in Flora, Indiana. Hey, Charles, what's up?
I was listening to you today about oligarchies in the South, and I just found it really interesting because I've just read a book, The Great Conspiracy by John Logan, which was written in 1885, and that really explains how the oligarchies did and how they caused the Civil War. And I was wondering if you'd ever read that book.
I haven't, but I'm making a note right now. The Great Conspiracy.
Yeah.
By John Logan, you said?
Yes, Logan.
Cool. I'll go looking for it when I get off the air today and get a copy. Thank you very much, Charles, for the heads up, for the tip on that. Appreciate it. Thank you. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. You know, there is a place in the world where being a bully is not celebrated, and that's Western Europe. Right now in Western Europe, you know, you've got a bunch of countries that have extraordinary diversity. I mean, even language diversity, religious diversity. Just you know, well, most of them are Christian countries, but you've got, you know, Turkey is a Muslim country. But you know, bottom line, you've got a lot of political, economic. You've got richer countries, poorer countries. You've got governments that are more to the right. You've got governments that are more to the left. You've got all this stuff in Western Europe, and Mike Pompeo went over there for the Munich Security Conference last week. It's a 3-day event. Well, actually, it was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so it ended last night, or last night in Europe. And this is absolutely fascinating. There's a piece about this. I read this article in Politico, and then I was reading the Financial Times, and I get the daily the Swamp News. It's a newsletter that for subscribers of the Financial Times, and the woman who writes it was talking about how just extraordinary it is. In fact, maybe I can pull it up and share it with you. Yeah, here it is, Swamp Notes. It's by Rana Foroohar, F-O-R-O-O-H-A-R. I don't know how she pronounces it. And she said, you know, I recently had the pleasure of hosting a State Department-led delegation of young international leaders at the Financial Times office. And she's talking about, and she says, at one point I asked the group what they consider to be the most underreported story by American media. And the consensus was how China is filling the diplomatic and economic vacuum created in America in places like Africa, Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and so on. And so she's talking about how, you know, there is a real kind of economic consequence to America's failure to participate in the world in a way that's meaningful, for America's failure to stand up for the values of democracy and pluralism and egalitarianism. But Europe is now starting to seriously push back. And this is quite remarkable. This, from the Politico piece, this is, I want to credit the author, Matthew Karnitsching wrote this piece. And he says, most alarming, the biggest disconnect concerns the U.S. commitment to Europe, the very essence of the transatlantic alliance itself. And basically, the German president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, opened the conference and attacked the Trump administration. He said that, you know, Trump is, quote, rejecting the idea of the international community. Well, this is like what Margaret Thatcher said in 1978, when she said there's no such thing as society, there's only a collection of individuals. This is what Trump is saying about nations. There's no such thing as an international community, there's only individual nations. And by the way, this is now the official policy of the United States. This is what Steve Bannon was talking about back during the campaign. And Trump, you know, isn't articulate enough to say it other than, you know, basically, we're not going to do multilateral agreements. In other words, we're not going to enter into agreements with multiple countries, or really more than 2 countries. We're going to do what are called bilateral agreements, which is us and somebody else. So we're going to work out deal after deal after deal with country after country after country. But these, you know, groups of countries like the European Union or like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, we don't want that. And so the president of Germany says the Trump administration is, quote, rejecting the idea of the international community. He goes on to say, every country should fend for itself and put its own interests above all others. Great again, be great again, even at the expense of neighbors and partners. And then Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, comes on, and he says, this was the next day, he says, what Europe wants is not quite the same as the U.S. And the author of this piece in Politico says U.S. officials were dumbfounded. And Mike Pompeo, I'm here to tell you the facts. Those statements do not reflect reality. Pompeo had been an army soldier in West Germany in the 1980s, and he said, no, we're here with you. And, he reminded the audience he's been to Germany 3 times in the last 4 months. I mean, I don't know how many times he went there looking for dirt on Joe Biden, but he said, is this an America that rejects responsibility? Let's be straight up. The U.S. is out there fighting for sovereignty and our friends. Well, it sounds nice, right? And Pompeo is like saying the right words. But I think that people are, well, I don't think, I know, Europeans are saying enough already. We're tired of this kind of rhetoric and this trash talking of the European alliance. Boris Johnson just canceled. I mean, the right wing Prime Minister of England, who was just elected on Trump's coattails, essentially, had a phone conversation with Donald Trump where he was saying, well, we may look at Huawei technology for the United Kingdom for 5G, and Trump went crazy on him and started yelling at him. I mean, Trump bullying people. And then, on top of bullying people and bullying people in their rallies, I mean, Bloomberg's ad does a good job of that. Now we find out that there's this new charity called the Urban Revitalization Coalition, led by Ohio pastor Darrell Scott, and he's giving money, cash money, to people to come to Trump rallies, people of color in particular, to come to Trump rallies. And he says, and this is a verbatim quote, come back in February when we give you $50,000. Now, we're not talking Andrew Yang stuff here. Groups like the NAACP are accusing this pastor, so-called pastor, of trying to buy support for Donald Trump. I can't call anybody who supports Donald Trump a Christian. And even the word pastor just, chokes me. So there's that. So bullying, tyranny, or the subtle distinction between tyranny and oligarchy, which is, and I think that line gets crossed when the oligarch is a tyrant, as Trump is. And the question is, if we get Trump out of office, what does it take for this country to recover?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I mean, I think we can probably rebuild our European alliances and alliances with other countries if we get another statesman like Barack Obama in. But here, at home, what's it going to take?
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Mind Blank, Cambridge Analytica, and the Plot to Break America by Christopher Wiley. My life now looks, this is from the Revelations chapter, next to the last chapter. My life now looks like that of a paranoid man, but after being assaulted in the street, receiving threats from rogue private security firms, having my hotel room broken into late at night as I was sleeping, and experiencing 2 hacking attempts on my email in the past 12 months, it's only sensible to be cautious. When I had my flat checked for security risks, the TV was deemed a risk, as it could be used to watch or listen to me without my ever knowing. As we dismantled it, I smiled at the irony of a TV that watches you. In the days leading up to the story's publication, when Facebook began sending me legal threats and escalated my case up to its deputy general counsel and vice president, my lawyers realized that the company saw my whistleblowing as a major threat to its business. Having experience on other hacking cases, my lawyers knew what companies backed into a corner were willing to do. But Facebook was different. They did not need to hack me. They could simply track me everywhere because of the apps on my phone, where I was, who my contacts were, who I was meeting. I disposed of my phone, and my lawyers bought new clean phones that have never touched Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp. The terms and conditions of Facebook's mobile app ask for microphone and camera access. Although the company is at pains to deny pulling user audio data for targeted advertising, there is nonetheless a technical permission sitting on our phones that allows access to audio capabilities. And I was not an average user. I was the company's biggest reputational threat at the time. At least in theory, audio could be activated, and my lawyers were concerned that the company could listen in on my conversations with them or with the police. Facebook already had access to my photos and my camera, which put them in a position to not just listen to me, but also to see where I was. Even if I was alone in the bathroom taking a shower, I wasn't ever really alone. If my phone was there, so was Facebook. There was no escape. But getting rid of my phone wasn't going to be enough. My mom, dad, and sisters all had to remove Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp from their phones for the same reason. But Facebook also knew who all my friends were. They knew where they liked to go out, what we wrote about in messages, and they knew where we all lived. Even hanging out with my friends became a risk, as Facebook had access to their phones. If a friend took a photo, Facebook could access it. And in facial recognition algorithms could, at least in theory, detect my face in the photos sitting on other people's phones, even if they were strangers to me. As I was getting rid of my old electronics, my friends joked that it was as if I was exorcising the demons inside the machines. And one friend even brought over some sage to burn, just in case. A funny gesture, of course, but in a way it really was an exorcism. We now live in a world where there are invisible spirits made of code and data that have the power to watch us, listen to us, and think about us. And I wanted these specters gone from my life. On March 16, 2018, a day before The Guardian and the New York Times published my story, Facebook announced that it was banning me, not only from Facebook, but also Instagram. Facebook had refused to ban white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and other armies of hate, but it had chosen to ban me. The company demanded that I hand over my phone and personal computer and said that the only way for me to be reinstated was, in effect, to give them the same information I was providing the authorities. Facebook behaved as if it were a nation state rather than a company. The firm did not seem to understand that I was not the subject of investigation. They were. My lawyers advised me to refuse their demands so as not to interfere with a lawful police and regulatory investigation. Later, when I was working with the authorities, the ban made it far more difficult to hand over evidence that was sitting on my Facebook account, and the investigation into what happened during the Brexit referendum suffered as a result. They say you appreciate something only when it's gone, and it was only when I was erased from Facebook that I truly realized how frequently my life touched their platform. Several of my phone's apps stopped working, a dating app, a taxi app, a messaging app, because they used Facebook authentication. Subscriptions and accounts I had on websites failed for the same reason. People often talk about a dualism, the cyber world and our real lives. But after having most of my digital identity confiscated, I can tell you that they are not separate. When you are erased from social media, you lose touch with people. I stopped getting invited to parties, not intentionally, but because those invites also happened on Facebook or were posted on Instagram. Friends who did not have my new phone number found it nearly impossible to get a hold of me, except for trying to send an email to my lawyers. When I got through the thick of the whistleblowing, it would only be in coincidental encounters at clubs or bars that I would make contact with people I had not seen in months. And now when guys on dating apps ask to check out my Instagram profile, it starts an awkward explanation of how I was banned and that I'm not catfishing, I promise. It's as if my identity has been confiscated and people no longer believe I am who I say I am. Sometimes I get recognized as that guy, and people worry that someone might start watching them if they decide to meet me. I always tell them that they needn't worry because these companies are already tracking them 24/7. This ban was nothing more than a dick move by Facebook, and it felt like trolling by frightened bullies. For me, it created at most an annoying personal hassle and was not nearly as consequential to my life as the kinds of retaliation that other whistleblowers have experienced, not to mention the degree of damage to modern society that the platform has already aided and abetted. But it showed me just how integral my online identity had become to so many facets of my life. The book by Christopher Wiley. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting.
Thom Hartmann here with you live from San Francisco. We're broadcasting from AM 910. I believe they call it Real Talk Radio here. It is our iHeartRadio affiliate in San Francisco. Tonight at 7 p.m., I will be at the Hillside Club, 2286 Cedar Street in Berkeley, or in Berkeley. Times have changed, and you can get tickets at the door or ThomHartmann.com. And then Wednesday, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal will be joining me for a discussion about the hidden history of the war on voting and all things voting and all this kind of stuff at Town Hall Seattle. That'll be at 7:30 p.m. And tickets for that are also available at ThomHartmann.com. And these are all, because of my book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. That's what we're doing, and that's what we're talking about. And, just the funniest thing, Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz wants all these laws to restrict women's rights to get abortions, to get access to birth control, to get information about reproductive, function, limiting the ability of kids in school to have sex education. Cruz is all over this stuff. So Alabama State Representative Yolanda Hollis has put forward a bill that would force men to get vasectomies at the age of 50 or after their third child. Now, this is tongue-in-cheek, sorta, and basically what she's saying is if Alabama is going to restrict the reproductive rights of women in Alabama, we need to restrict the reproductive rights of men. You want fewer abortions? Force men to get a vasectomy after the third child. And Cruz read this on some right-wing website and thought it was like, this might be made into law. Oh my God. Well, here's his exact quote. Yikes! A government big enough to give you everything is big enough to take everything. Literally, Alabama Democrat proposes bill mandating all men have vasectomy after their third child. Poor Ted. But anyway, 24,000 replies and counting. Zach in North Hollywood. Hey, Zach, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom.
Hey.
There's quiet, thoughtful authority, and our audience of 70% to go with it. And there's the loudest voice in the room type of authority with the 30% audience to go with it. I think Putin and Trump really are going all in on the thought that they're going to ride the word socialist and the term socialism. They think they're going to ride it to victory in 2020. And
I agree. And it's not just Putin. He's got help from Mohammed bin Salman. He's got help from the United Arab Emirates. He's got help from some Israeli right-wing billionaires there, and certainly the oligarchs in the United States, Shelley Adelson et al. Yeah. And
they're betting on the fact that people are going to believe their definition of it, that socialism means programs that entitle lazy people to sit around and collect benefits that rich people pay for. And that's the big lie. That's the big lie. Now, Bernie's
don't you think maybe, Zach, it's time for America to have this conversation? I mean, we have had socialism for the rich ever since 1981 in a huge way. We had socialism for the rich, obviously, before that. But now you get the fossil fuel industry getting hundreds of billions of dollars a year in subsidies. You got the banking industry that's gotten $20 trillion worth of subsidies and supports since 2008. I mean, pick your industry, right?
We've really had
you got 90 of the Fortune 500 paid no taxes.
We've really had a blend, a social capital blend, for a long time. All we're really asking for is we just want a more social future where the American dream is alive and well, with more opportunity for the bottom-up fair shakers above and beyond the advertising inheriting class, the me, daddy downers, so we can just make safe, sane progress. That's all.
Yeah, and here's the question to ask somebody who is going off on socialism. Who was the first president of the United States to sign legislation that gave free housing, food, clothing, and medical care to poor people?
Roosevelt.
Do you know?
Right?
No. George Washington.
Oh man, that's a
George Washington signed legislation that established a poorhouse in Washington, D.C. for the poor people of Washington, D.C., and that poorhouse provided them with shelter, clothing, food, and health care. George Washington
Tom, job one for the American people is just this: to determine the difference between truth and pure propaganda. It's simple.
There you go. There you go. I'm with you. Thanks a lot for the call, Zach. Pam in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Pam, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. And thank you very much for your new book series. I love it. I've read all 3 of them, and they are easy and concise reads, just chock full of information. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I wanted to let you know that me and a group of friends and family members went to the Bernie rally in Denver yesterday. And we
Tell
were
me
very
about it.
inspired, of course. Yeah, it was great. Great turnout and just a diversity of crowds.
Wasn't it like 11,000 people?
Over 11,000 people. They had to change the venue. Wow. So, but it was so inspiring. And the group that I went with, we went out to dinner afterwards and had a conversation about it. And we wanted to kind of share our thoughts with you. We had some solutions and benefits to them, and we wanted to get your ideas. We're all fans of yours, by the way. So, of course, Bertie talked a lot about challenging billionaires, the oligarchs, and the monopolies. And so we were thinking about, how do billionaires become billionaires? Are they really working that much harder? And really, we came down to 4 points: through deregulation, through buying political influence, which you write about brilliantly in your hidden history of the Supreme Court, tax injustice, wage theft, and overcharging for goods and services. We had others, but those are kind of the ones that we focused on. So we had solutions for those, and what would be to re-regulate, of course, and to overturn Citizens United in the 76 and 78 decisions, but also to not tax labor. And we defined labor as a minimum and maximum wage of 5 times. Because we're teachers, we're truck drivers, I'm a school bus driver, there were engineers and software developers there. And, you know, from our work experience, we figured if we go off of Bernie's $15 minimum dollars wage, and the maximum then, if it's 5 times, would be $75 an hour. People can't really work 5 times harder. I don't care if you're the CEO of a company. I used to work as an executive assistant, and so I've been around the VP execs and CEOs, and they have people doing their work for them. They have a lot of free time put into their schedules. I used to put that free time into their schedules. So we really think that people can't work 5 times harder than anybody else. So roughly that would be $30K as a minimum yearly wage and $150K a year. So here's what we came up from the benefits of doing that, and we'd like your opinion on this. So one thing, it would bring back the dignity of work. Right now, you know, you're seen as a fool for being working class. You know, you have to be the owner of a business, and then you're smart like, you know, Donald Trump, right? 2, it would shift stolen income back to the working class, which would stimulate the economy. And 3, it would stop Republicans from scaring the working class that Dems will raise their taxes. If that, you know, meant that working wage, that labor of 15 minimum, maximum $75 an hour, never are taxed, because that's the working class, we treat them with dignity, then the Republicans can't always say that the Dems are going to raise their taxes. And then it would also create a stabilized working class force. So what do you think of our ideas?
I think they're great ideas. I think they're absolutely great. I think we need to revive the old Roman saying that has been reinvented in every society. You know, behind every great fortune, there's a great crime. Number 1. And number 2, Jack Vance, one of my very favorite science fiction writers, he's now passed away, but Louise and I got to know him and his wife Norma very well while he was alive. And he wrote about the Gaian Reach, you know, this part of the universe, this cluster of solar systems and constellations and whatever, galaxies. And the currency that was used throughout the Gaian Reach was the SVU, the single value unit. That was their dollar. And what it represented was 1 hour of a person's labor, regardless of what kind of labor it was. And that idea that money and labor should be tied together is a brilliant idea. And I'm guessing that's kind of how a lot of money started, was in that regard. So, and then the third thing I would say is, right now, if you make money by sitting on your butt around the pool like Paris Hilton does, waiting for the dividend checks to arrive, you pay a maximum 15% tax. That's the capital gains tax. Money making money, right? 15% maximum tax. If you make your living working your butt off, as laying pavement or doing a radio show or whatever it may be, right? Driving a school bus, being a teacher, you pay a maximum 37 to 9%. I don't know what it is now after the after the Trump tax cuts. We should flip that. We should say that the capital gains tax is now the labor tax with a maximum of 15%, and what we call the labor tax now is what we're going to apply to capital gains, and start clawing back some of this money that these billionaires have stolen from us. Pam, wonderful. Thank you so much for the call. Thanks for filling us in about the Bernie meeting there in Colorado. It sounds like a lot of people went and had a great time.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. And just a heads up, Dr. Justin Frank is going to be with us in the next hour. And welcome back. Edward in Brooklyn, New York. And let me just, Tom in Jerusalem, I'm going to get to you in 3 minutes, so if you can hold on. Edward, what's up?
Yeah, how you doing, Tom? I'm glad to talk to you today. Bill Barr, when I seen him on TV telling the Trump, hey, stop tweeting, it was like, what was the word I want to use? It was justifying the fact that it was an inside job. Like, oh, he's going on TV to talk about don't tweet about what's going on instead of just picking up the phone and say stop.
It's like the driver from a bank robbery saying, well, we really didn't intend to rob the bank. We just wanted to go open an account.
Yeah, right. To me, that was a CYA move. You understand?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I know when you talk about these super delegates, who do you think's going to get them this year? Mike Bloomberg. Watch and see. I predict Bloomberg is going to get all the super delegates, and they're going to, unfortunately, Bernie, I love the guy. Don't get me wrong. I love that man. And what happened when you were talking about Bush and Gore, when the Supreme Court says, no, that's it, stop counting. And Trump lost. And nobody said anything. Nobody went down there and bust loads and say, wait a minute, boom, 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 boom. We're closing down Florida. Until you
we should have done that. I mean, in my book, I point out that according to the exit polls, Hillary Clinton won Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin by large margins. And the vote was rigged. I mean, these guys, by pushing people off
if you believe one vote counts, that ain't working. To me, believe me, I live in Brooklyn. I see a lot of things. And I live in the hood. And what I see in the hood is terrible. People are going broke. People are working 2 jobs and they can't feed themselves. They got to go to pantries. And yet these people are beaten down so bad, Tom. Nobody's saying, hey, give me debt before I have to continue this.
Yeah, and then Trump reaches out to them and says, you're in this situation because black and brown people want to take your job when they're talking to white people
that is
in
such
the neighborhoods.
A ridiculous argument in AI, in a world that's run by AI. That is such a ridiculous argument. And the fact is that these people believe this. They believe it the same way Bloomberg. I worked for Bloomberg in 2005 when he ran for mayor. He's a guy that buys another term at $78 a vote. And he's got such a thing for Trump. Tom, I can't express it to you over the phone like I would, but he'll spend $78,000 a vote just to get Trump's.
Yeah, I remember he spent in one of his elections. It was $78 per vote was what he spent.
Right,
I mean, he just carpet bombed. Yeah,
I'm telling you, that was the last one because when I worked 2005, but I didn't work the second time. And to me, I mean, I liked the way he did conduct himself in the beginning, but power ruins people. Hey, and perfect example is sitting in the White House. And you're right. Yeah. There is no more 3 acts of government. There's only 2. and them two are controlled by one. And his name happens to be Donald Trump. And people want to believe that, this election's going to be fair. No, this ain't going to be fair. Trump ain't going nowhere. I hate to say that. Even if Bloomberg wins.
We'll see. We'll see. The big question that the Democratic Party is facing right now is it going to be people power that is going to push Trump out? In other words, basically the Bernie campaign? Or is it going to be money power that's going to push Trump out, that being the Bloomberg campaign? Or if Bernie gets the nomination, will Bloomberg join with him? Will he get behind him and make that happen? And, time will tell. Edward, we just all have to keep our eye on it, but your trenchant observations are appreciated. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you live from San Francisco, where tonight I will be at the Hillside Club, 2286 Cedar Street in Berkeley. And tickets are available at the door and also at thomhartmann.com. It's at 7 p.m. So we need to standardize all these things at 7 p.m. The one in Washington State in particular. So anyhow, that's what's going on there. Tom in Jerusalem, Israel. Hey, Tom. Thanks for watching us on YouTube way over there.
Hi, how are you? Thank you very much for mentioning the Roman Republic, because I really think that's the correct rabbit hole to be going to without going to the wrong Mad Hatter's party. I can understand starting with the Nazis. However, America is a republic, okay, or it started that way, and it's now an empire, and you can really see that from overseas. And as the empire became more of an empire, the people at the bottom lost out, and the oligarchies won big time. And more than anything else, I'd like you maybe just to comment on that. I think this is more of a way of analyzing what's going on. And I know it doesn't break down exactly, but when you look at, Capitol Hill, after just it goes on and on and on. Anyway, thank you very much for your focus there. And you're on the same route as like Christopher Hedges. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. There's a book, about a new book about the Roman Republic. And it's called something like The Fragile Republic. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering it exactly. I read it about a year ago, and I talked about it on the air. I don't recall if we had the author on or not, but it basically makes it doesn't make parallels to contemporary times, but they're so obvious the author doesn't need to make them. And it leads right up to Augustus and the Roman Empire turning into basically a naked tyranny. Whereas it had just flirted with that before. So thank you very much for the call, Tom, and thanks for watching us there in Israel. Jake in Seattle. Hey, Jake, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow up here.
Oh, wonderful.
Colin, I think I might have figured out a way to solve our problems here, Well, unfortunately, Trump is not the cause of them. He's a result of them. And that's going back to that idea of oligarchy and tyranny. And so, thankfully, we live in a society where our billionaire, donors and politicians seem to really be caring about us now. So I'd like to propose this idea for people like Trump or Bloomberg who think that they can use their money to fix the country. Here's how we should do it. I think that if we created some sort of public trust or fund ran somewhat like the Fed that would supply funding to all presidential candidates and national races. At the same time,
we already have that, Jake.
Outlawing. Oh yes, but at the same time, passing laws to outlaw campaign spending by private individuals or companies or organizations, essentially setting a limit to how loud the loudest voice in the room can be, leveling the playing field.
We did that in 1974 and 1975 after the Nixon scandals. And actually, we did that in 1907. It was called the Tillman Act. Teddy Roosevelt got this passed, which said that corporations could not contribute anything, zero, no dollars at all to federal campaigns. And there were a number of other good government laws during that era. There were some passed in the 1930s and 40s, and then we really nailed it down in the 1970s. And in 1976, in the Buckley decision, and 78 in the Bellotti decision, the Supreme Court knocked all those things down. And then with Citizens United in 2010, they doubled down on it and expanded it. And then in 2013 in McCutcheon, they said that there's literally no limit to the number of politicians an individual billionaire may own. And, which has given Michael Bloomberg enormous influence, as well as Charles Koch. So that's where we're at. I mean, what you're talking about is what we were talking about in the 70s, and Congress actually passed with Republicans and Democrats. Yeah. I mean, politicians, generally speaking, don't like being owned by oligarchs. But because of the Supreme Court, that's why I wrote, that's why that book, the Hidden History of the Supreme Court, The Betrayal of America, was the second of the series, because it's so important that people understand that the court system has the ability to blow up legislation and has totally corrupted our political system. And of course, that's why, Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell are running an assembly line in the Senate to put right-wing cranks, young right-wing cranks, in lifetime appointments on federal benches. But your point of the need for campaign finance reform, spot on. I'm totally with you. Jake, thanks for the call. Neil in Hartford, Connecticut. Hey, Neil, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Appreciate you taking the call. I was just recently having a conversation with some conservatives that are really amped at the idea of running against Bernie Sanders. And I asked them, I said, the history of this? And they're like, oh, well, we're going to have a socialist would-be president, and we're going to mop the floor with him. I said, but that's not the history, is it? I said, you took on FDR, and he beat you so bad so often you had to amend the Constitution of the United States. You didn't have to run against him again. That's Democrats have stayed true to FDR, held the House of Representatives for over 40 years. It wasn't until Democrats started to act like Republicans and cozy up to the banks as the Wall Street corporations that really Republicans stood a chance. So
yeah, and I would point out it wasn't 40 years, it was 70 years. From 1932 right up until 1996. I believe that's 70 years. I don't do math in my head fast well, but that's a hell of a long time. And it wasn't, the Congress didn't flip to the Republicans in a big way until Gingrich. I mean, there were two little interregnums there, but they were pretty meaningless, number one. And number two, be careful what you wish for. I remember in 1980, when Jimmy Carter was president and Ronald Reagan got the nomination, a lot of us were celebrating. Oh my God, Ronnie Reagan, that crazy B actor with the movies with the chimpanzees from California, nobody's going to vote for him. And then, of course, when Donald Trump got the nomination, they were celebrating at Clinton headquarters. Oh, he'll be so easy to beat. So anybody who thinks, that they're going up against a guy who's got a passionate following, hang on.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We have a special video up over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program, and it's about how a letter that the IRS sent out to 3.9 million Americans saved 700 lives. And you're like, wait a minute, the IRS saved 700 lives? How did that happen? Well, it had to do with Obamacare, and it's a fascinating story. And it turns out that this analysis of this IRS mailing was actually the first time that the federal government has done a study that actually proved that people having access to health care produces fewer deaths. For every 1,648 people who got the letter, there was one fewer premature death. I'll explain the whole thing in the video. It's as I said, it's available over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and it is really worth checking out. And it's a great ad, essentially, for a national health care system. For our book club today, we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation,
to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglas was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglas was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight. Cities have higher rates of mortality. The book Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you live from San Francisco. We're doing our show today from Talk 1090, Real Talk 1090, 910 in San Francisco, our iHeartRadio affiliate. And that's because tonight I'll be in Berkeley at the Berkeley Arts and Letters series on the hidden history of the war on voting. It'll be at the Hillside Club, 2286 Cedar Street in Berkeley, and tickets are available at thomhartmann.com or at the door. Or actually, there's a link to where tickets are available. We're not involved in selling tickets, but they're. So anyhow, and Wednesday we'll be at Town Hall Seattle. So FYI. On the line with us is our old buddy, Dr. Justin Frank, an MD. He's a psychoanalyst. He's a clinical professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at George Washington University. He's the author of Obama on the Couch, Bush on the Couch, and now Trump on the Couch. His Twitter handle is Justin Frank MD. Dr. Frank, welcome back.
Hi. Nice to be back, Tom.
I want to run something by you and with apologies that we didn't get this to you before you came on so you could prepare for it or think about it. But I know you think fast on your feet, and I really want to.
I hope so. Yeah.
Radio station CJAD has a great host. His name is Dave Kaufman. And Dave did an interview with a celebrity and a comedian who used to work on The Apprentice with Donald Trump. His name is Noel Casler. And sure. I want to play you about a minute clip. It's a little more than a minute of Dave Casler in this interview describing his experience of working with Donald Trump, and use that as the thing to set this conversation, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
So here it is. This is Noel Casler.
I told him the real deal about Trump that people didn't know. He was an open drug addict. Everyone knew it. None of this stuff was a secret. You know, that he was doing coke on shows 20 years ago when we'd do, you know, the VH1 Fashion Awards, and I used to do the beauty pageants with him in the 90s. You know, he was an open drug user, open sexual assaulter, and this stuff was just kind of accepted.
Okay, and it's not
this
you
is the
heard
host,
this
Mr.
firsthand. It's
Kaufman.
you saw this with your own eyes.
Absolutely. That's when most of the drug use occurred on The Apprentice, when he had to read cue cards. He'd get really nervous, so he'd go in the bathroom, crush up Adderall. He'd come back to set. There'd be white chunks flying out of his nose, white powder under his nose. He's doing the same thing as a candidate and as a president. You know, it gives him a feeling of being in control. but he's clearly an addict. If you know anything about addiction, untreated addiction as a president is the worst thing you could have. So, yeah, he was obviously high that night. That was the same person we saw in The Apprentice. And I remember watching that and like, yep, he's high. And it was probably wasn't just Adderall. He did coke, he did meth, he had drug dealers coming to the after parties selling it to him. Adderall is his maintenance high. It's what he does during the day. When he gets down to Mar-a-Lago and these other places, he gets into it a little harder. He also uses benzodiazepine, Valium and stuff to come down when he hits it hard. So when you see him slurring and stuff, that's from the benzos.
So, he goes on, and it's a pretty shocking interview, and he also talks about, being witness to Trump sexually assaulting people. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have a few thoughts about it. First of all, the thing that is, I had a chapter in my book that I did not submit to the publisher, which was called The Adderall Presidency. And I decided that there was not enough data, that was hard data about it, but in terms of evidence, and I wish that, I had known Noel earlier and that there was some more data available. But basically, his behavior is very similar to people who are very heavily into cocaine or Adderall. There was a book written last year called Blitzed, maybe 2 years ago now, about the use of amphetamines by the Blitzkrieg, by the Luftwaffe, and by Hitler's people, and that it allowed people to essentially be awake 18 to 20 hours a day and be really high and on and able to kind of stay alert and not need a lot of sleep. And I do think that is not something I would rule out at all about President Trump. He does sniff an awful lot when he gives his talks. Even now, you can hear him sniffing between sentences or even in the middle of a sentence. And that's something that you see with people who have their nasal passages slightly worn down by cocaine or Adderall that is snorted. The problem is that people who have early signs of particular word-finding prefrontal dementia also sniff when they talk. And it's hard to know which is which without having a proper MRI and a proper neurological evaluation, and he needs that. So those are my first thoughts. The second thought is about Adderall per se. Adderall is only available, as far as I know, by prescription. So I'm just wondering who gives him the prescriptions. Who's his doctor? Where is he getting?
Probably Ronnie. I forget his last name, but the guy who was the White House physician that he wanted to make Surgeon General. I know who Ronnie is. He is the White House physician, but there is so much control. I mean, it's true he's the president, and you can get past controls, I guess. But to write a prescription now, you have to write it out. It has to be in duplicate. I mean, I have to get all kinds of permission to give it to people. I think the second question then is he doesn't have to get that because cocaine is illegal. You can buy that through any kind of a dealer, and he may have dealers. Clearly, he is speedy in certain ways. His tweets in the middle of the night, his getting up very early, all are consistent with some kind of abuse of a psychological stimulant. I don't know where to go with that except that's probably the case. The biggest problem with the stimulants in a president or anybody who has a responsible job is that the first thing that gets compromised is judgment. So people actually can't assess the sanity of what they're saying, but they don't have the judgment in terms of thinking about the consequences of what they're saying and what's going to happen. So it's very similar to alcohol, actually, ironically, that judgment is soluble in alcohol, and that you. But then the second problem that's related specifically to stimulants is impulsive behavior, and people are much more comfortable being impulsive, shooting from the hip, saying things impulsively, and then the third thing is rage reactions.
people who use a lot of
which he does regularly.
amphetamines have acute rage reactions, recurring rage reactions, and those are really disturbing if that's the case with President Trump.
Dr. Frank, we have just
those are my thoughts for the moment.
We have just a minute left before we're not even a minute now before we hit a hard break that I can't control because I'm on the road here. You wrote a piece called "On a Fundamental Level, Donald Trump Does Not Believe in America." Could you speak to that for a moment?
Well, on a fundamental level, he doesn't. He doesn't respect people. He doesn't respect law. He doesn't respect the Constitution. He doesn't believe in what America is founded on, which is a three-part system of government. He doesn't really believe in it. He does not respect this country. He is not a person who tries to unite people and bring people together. The whole concept of America is called the United States, not the divided states.
Yeah.
You got to go.
Dr. Justin Frank, his article "On a Fundamental Level, Donald Trump Does Not Believe in America," you can find it over at salon.com. And Dr. Frank, of course, is the psychoanalyst, clinical professor, Department of Psychiatry, Behavioral Science at George Washington University, and the author of Trump on the Couch. And Dr. Frank, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls live from San Francisco in just a moment. And welcome back. Kim in Olympia, Washington. Hey, Kim, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I've been reading Martin Luther King Jr.'s book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? I find it enlightening for me and inspiring. It reminds me that our country has been through very, very difficult times, and mostly it's been paid through the blood of black people. And America white needs to wake up. And we are experiencing what the blacks have experienced for 400 years.
Well, we're not experiencing anything close to that, but I get it that white people are starting to realize what tyranny looks like.
Right, and look at Hong Kong and what happened and the reign of terror put on those protesters. And nonviolence, we need to learn about nonviolence. And it's a strategy that Martin Luther King talks about in that book and why it's an essential tool. So it was encouraging to me, and I just want to encourage readers to read it because it will show you how to unite with black people.
Great. Kim, thank you very much. It's great to hear from you. Joe in Cupertino, California. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Hey, welcome to the neighborhood, Tom. I understand you're here in town. I'm going to do everything I can to get over to Berkeley, but, there's a big rally today in Richmond, California, which is about maybe 30 minutes from where you're at the Craneway Pavilion on 14. I think Bernie's going to be there. I wondered if you got a chance to see what Ralph Nader had put down on The Intercept about Bernie Sanders over the weekend. I was very inspired by him. Of course, he's quite
I did not read that. Ralph wrote the foreword to my next book. We've been talking, but I didn't read what he wrote about Bernie.
Well, if he wins the election against Trump, should he get the nomination, it has to be a massive surge of voter turnout, which will sweep out a lot of the Republicans in Congress. And so we'll have a much better, more receptive Congress, and that'll sweep out the corporate Democrats in the Democratic National Committee. And it will reorient the Democratic Party to where it should be, which is a party of, by, and for the people. And that's why they want to fight with him. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think that Bernie is the guy who could do it. I think if Elizabeth Warren were to build a movement like Bernie's or merge them together, she may have that capability too. I'm glad that there are two progressives, out there. But my sense of it is that at the end of the day, it's going to be Bernie versus Bloomberg. Frankly, I think that's what it's going to come down to in the Democratic Party. We'll see. I mean, I've tried to handicap races before and been very, very wrong. But anyhow, we'll see. Joe, thanks for the call. Sandy in Denver. Hey, Sandy, what's up?
Hi, happy President's Day.
Thank you. Back at you.
next year we'll be celebrating President Bernie Sanders. I was at his rally last night, the second one since last fall, and I was doing petitioning for a senatorial candidate here in Colorado. There's about 9 people running against Cory Gardner, and we've got to get him out of there. But I did want to put a plug in for the ladies. There's 3 progressive women running in Colorado for the Senate. I'm supporting Diana Bray, and there's 2 others.
This is in the Democratic primary?
Yep. There's 2 others. Some are petitioning, some are caucusing, and the 3 of them, Diana is a strong progressive, supports Bernie and his platform, and is a climate champion. And the 3 of the women have formed kind of a pact. They want to get one of the 3 of them on the ballot. The other
great.
2 are
Sandy, we're out
Lorena.
of time, but thank you very much. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Tina in Booker, Florida. Hey, Tina, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Just fine, yeah.
Hello?
Yes, I hear you.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, I hear you now. I was wanting to ask about, like the electoral votes, where, they're, voter suppression and all that. Well, I was wondering, I heard that they had to do with, slavery and, I guess, the industrial or something, because they made a lot of money back then. And I'm just wondering, if that's true, why aren't people rising, like they rise to take the statues down and all that? Because that's suppressing our vote, if that's right.
Yeah, it is right. The electoral vote came about for a couple of reasons. The main reason was that America was so large. We were, geographically, we were the largest developed country in the world in 1787, physically. And the question was, how do you get people in remote places in Georgia or in Vermont to actually know a candidate? And so the solution that the framers of the Constitution came up with was we'll create this thing called the Electoral College, who will choose the president, and the individual members, the electors, will be chosen by their local communities as wise elders. And the community will say, well, we really kind of prefer John Adams, but if you could vote for Thomas Jefferson, that's okay once you get there. And in Federalist 56, I'm pretty sure it is, Alexander Hamilton lays this out, and he says that the reason for this is to make sure that we don't elect somebody as a president who is a knave, who is basically a hustler or a scam artist, or who is in the pocket of a foreign government. And I lay all this out.
Voted in then.
I'm sorry?
How did Trump get voted in then?
Well, because the Electoral College doesn't work the way it used to, Tina, and Hamilton lays this out in Federalist 56, and it worked. It fulfilled that purpose for the first 30 or 40 years of America. But then we had, by that time, by the 1830s, 1840s, we had national newspapers. By the 1860s, we had transcontinental railroads. We no longer needed the Electoral College. And back in the 1970s, I think it was 74, Birch Bayh led an effort in the United States Senate to amend the Constitution to get rid of the Electoral College. And it got the 2/3 vote necessary in the House of Representatives. And it was 2 votes short of a 2/3 majority in the Senate. And and it lost because of a couple of Republican votes. So now there is an attempt to get around the Electoral College rather than amend the Constitution, which is very difficult. And that attempt is called the National Popular Vote. And if you go to nationalpopularvote. Whatever it is, it's com or org. I think it's .com. National Popular Vote, though. You plug that in and you'll get it. You'll find that state after state after state has joined this, and each state pledges that whoever wins the majority of votes in the country, we will give our electoral votes to that candidate. And so had enough states to hit 270 electors joined this national compact in 2000, Al Gore would have been president. And in 2016, Hillary Clinton would have been president. So the only thing that's blocking it are Republican states. And so we need to get on that. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was listening to your earlier conversation, and there's this topic of succession came up today on C-SPAN, and the whole thing is that this whole society and our economy is wrapped around monopoly, and monopoly is so prevalent. And then you jump ahead to the Republican Party being co-opted by rich corporations, and the silent Democratic piece of the majority of the Democratic Party since Bill Clinton, that has been corporate influence, that has suffered from corporate influence, and now it gives us Bloomberg. Is corporatocracy, or this thing we're living in, isn't it eventually monopoly or totalitarian in nature? And I'll kick back and listen.
Yeah, sure. Yep. Corporations are hierarchies. Corporations are little kingdoms. And if you want to see the difference between an oligarchy and a tyranny, look at the difference between a small business, or in some cases even larger businesses, where the owner is a reasonable person who has a good relationship with his or her employees and runs the company and in a way that's nice, let's say. Versus the owners, and I've worked for people like this back when I was a teenager, I remember the guy who was the manager at Bob's Big Boy in East Lansing, Michigan, where I got a job as a dishwasher, and I ended up waiting tables, for a couple of days because this guy was such an ass that the way he treated the women, the waiters, the wait staff, they called them waitresses back then. Was so bad that they went on strike. They all walked out one day. They were sick and tired of his plain petty tyrant, particularly directing his rage. I mean, he would have rages against the girls who were working there. And I say girls because a lot of them were teenagers. And so
bully.
That's he was a bully, absolutely. And so companies by structure are oligarchies. And when you get a company owner or manager, like the guy who ran Bob's Big Boy back in the day, then they become tyrannies. Making sense? Is that a good analogy?
Yes, it does. And I thank you for elaborating on that. Could I touch on one of the subjects that's been touched on the show earlier about
quickly, please. There's other people who want to get in.
Okay. I would really like to see the progressive wing, that would be Warren and Bernie Sanders, get together on a taxpayer bill of rights, equality for taxpayers across the board.
I think it's a great idea, and probably Elizabeth Warren already has a plan to that effect. Randy, thank you. And Bernie has spoken, about how outrageous it is that if you make money with money, you pay a maximum 15% income tax. If you make money by working, it's 39%. Really?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We should simply reverse that. Flip it on its head. This is nuts. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
For our book club today, we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era, quote, "We've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze," end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Well, a startling story over at rawstory.com about how the Border Patrol, the headline is, does Donald Trump have a secret police waiting in the wings? It's a fascinating article by John Stower. And they're quoting this guy from the Border Patrol, which says, Border Patrol does not believe they are a civilian law enforcement agency. They believe they are kin to the Marine Corps. They do not believe they are accountable to Congress, which is why they have no issues lying to them even while under oath, which has happened repeatedly. They believe they are only accountable to presidents like Trump. Border Patrol believes it is not required to answer to local police, FBI, CIA, or any other law enforcement agency. They claim to be the, quote, premier, end quote, law enforcement agency, and this is in italics, superior to all others. They say they will become, quote, a national police force, end quote, to be used by a president to enforce laws even among citizens. Check it out. It's over at rawstory.com. It's truly, truly chilling. Paul in Glenside, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to touch on the whole apparatus of voter suppression. There's a technique that's used with the mass communication media to suppress people, especially on the day of voting. And what that technique basically is to downplay any type of chance of a really popular, surging candidate who might be challenging the establishment, basically putting down or just ignoring any chance that person might win. So this is very analogous to what we see with Bernie Sanders, where the Iowa caucus was basically thrown into this fog of war type of situation where nobody knew what was going on, and days later, when in fact it was quite clear that he came out with the most actual raw votes of individual voters, if not each and every single caucus who varied in size. Right. What I'm specifically referring to for people to check out, and you might want to take a look at it yourself if you haven't already, on Netflix, there's a tremendous series. It's called Narcos, and this current season that just came out focuses on the rise of the Mexican drug cartel, the amalgamation of many different drug organizations into one big national cartel led by a man named Felix. And what it shows is how the final piece for his empire building, which we see today, this takes place in the mid-'80s during the Ronald Reagan era, was he allied himself with the PRI, which is the Permanent Revolutionary Party of Mexico, which is very corrupt. And at this period in time...
This was Vicente Fox's party, wasn't it?
I believe so. And the character... Now, some of this stuff might be fictionalized because, they don't always want to drag a whole lot of people down. But they very accurately portray news that I well remember. They bring in the School of the Americas, the Sandinistas versus the Contras, the involvement of the CIA, all things that were splashed all over the headlines. So we had a tremendous amount of transparency at that time about what was going on and the involvement of what was going on in the Mexican side of the border. Well, in it, the key point I'm trying to bring out was they're having a big election, and it was one of the most widely hailed elections for transparency, where there were all kinds of advisors and observers and lawyers present that had handwritten ballots. There were tallies in front of people publicly, and each tally from each precinct.
Paul, let's cut to the chase
central
here.
Computer. The computer program was hacked by the drug dealer and he used it to put the PRI in power to cement his alliance. And they went on to have from one billionaire in Mexico to 25. They privatized everything. That was his.
Yeah, and now we're seeing that the Russian government, or Russian hackers anyway, were inside some of our voting machines. We know about the ones in Florida, apparently other states. There were Iranians in them. There were North Koreans in them. There were people from the United Arab Emirates.
The key thing is to broadcast over the mass media that, it looks like all those polls about Bernie Sanders were wrong. He's just so far behind.
Well, this is the exact same thing we saw, Paul, and thank you for your comments. This is the exact same thing that we saw where, Hillary Clinton lost the election. Well, wait a minute. The exit polls in Florida show that she won. The exit polls in North Carolina show she won. The exit polls in Pennsylvania show she won. We're talking about 5.9 point swing. The exit polls in Michigan shows and Wisconsin shows she won. Let's have a conversation about that. We took down, or the Ukrainian people took down the Yanukovych government, the government of Ukraine, because the exit polls didn't agree with the official tallies. Megan in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Megan, what's on your mind? Megan? Listing on Sirius XM in Burlington, Vermont? No, Megan. Michael in Indianapolis, Indiana. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
Love your show. Thanks for having me on. I want to ask a question. We've noticed with the Clinton presidency and now the Trump presidency that if the House and the Senate are controlled by two different parties, that the president can be impeached but not convicted. Basically, due to partisanship, it appears so far. I'm wondering if the situation goes so far as to theorize that if the House and the Senate are ever controlled by the same party that is not the party the president represents, then have we got to a situation where a president could not fail to be convicted of an impeachment regardless of the validity of the impeachment?
It would have to be a 2/3 majority, Michael. I believe, I'm not certain of this, but I believe that the Senate was controlled by Democrats in the Clinton impeachment. Newt Gingrich impeached him in the House, and then that went to the Senate, and it didn't go. It didn't go anywhere. I mean,
right, because the Democrats shot it down, same as the Republicans shot it down this time, right? I get what you're saying about the two-thirds, but yeah.
But 2/3 is a really, really high bar. I mean, that's why they put it in there.
So basically, it wouldn't be a fear unless the Senate and House and Senate were controlled by the same party that opposes the president's party, and the Senate has
in an overwhelming fashion in the Senate. Yeah. In the House it requires just a simple majority, but in the Senate they've got to have 2/3 of the vote, and I think that's always going to be a challenge. So yeah, thanks a lot for the call, Michael. Sam in Pasadena. Hey, Sam, what's up?
Hi, hello. Can you hear me?
Just fine.
Hi. Yes, hi. I love your show. I love it even more when I found out. You're a vegan. So I wanted to ask you about some veganism stuff. Why do you think that people are, as progressives, don't you think more people would be wanting to try it out, or because, it's really fighting for injustice, climate injustice, injustice for the voiceless. So I want to get your opinion on why so many people are not receptive to the idea of veganism.
Well, you've got Trump and Rush Limbaugh and all these guys saying that the Green New Deal is coming for your hamburgers and things like that. The simple fact of the matter is that and people resist lifestyle changes, particularly large lifestyle changes. I mean, for me, becoming a vegan after I'd been a vegetarian since I was 17, so I basically just cut cheese and eggs out. And I'll confess, I mean, if I'm in a restaurant and there's a little bit of cheese on a salad or something, I'll go ahead and eat it. I'm not religious about it, but I'm damn, and at a home, we are 100%, our kitchen is 100% vegan. But I think that if the average person was just to, let's start with meatless Mondays, get an Impossible Whopper at Burger King, if there's or just have salad, there's lots of great food that is plant-based. That what would happen is that you're extending your lifespan, you're reducing the risk of heart disease, you're reducing the risk of diabetes and obesity, you're reducing the risk of cancer, actually. And it was outside the mainstream for a long time, Sam, and there's a lot of people who, veganism is also often associated with, PETA and the animal rights movement. I had this conversation with the president of PETA last week on this show. And that's just not their thing. But there's an amazing video on Netflix now that was made by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who has become a vegan, about plant-based diet. It's called Game Changers. And he interviews and shows literally the strongest man in the world. He's a vegan, the fastest runner in the world, a vegan. 2/3 of the members of one of the big NFL football teams now are vegans. It just goes on and on and on. It's really quite extraordinary. And if you want to help the planet, and if you want to help yourself, and if you want to help your pocketbook, dial back on the meat and the animal products and the dairy products. Just dial them back, and ultimately, gradually, you can get to zero painlessly. Sam, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I'm live in San Francisco from AM 910. Tonight I'll be in Berkeley at 7 p.m. at the Hillside Club, 2286 Cedar Street. And welcome back. Terry in Ventura, California. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Great to talk to you. Tom, a couple calls ago, you talked about the national popular vote. That's been one of my issues, okay? Quick question and a quick comment. I don't believe in wasting my time and money, and I have called and sent letters via their website as to strategy. My comment, remember Bush v. Gore? If I recall history correctly, at the very last minute, if all the votes were counted, the state legislature said, we will change the law and appoint the electors via the legislature. My point.
Yeah, they didn't do it, but there were Republican members of the Florida House of Representatives who were saying that to the media, but it never came to that. And right. Frankly, right. I don't know that they could have pulled it off. I doubt that. I think that was more bluster than anything else.
I think some were serious, Tom. They have no respect for
well, I'm sure he was, the guy was dead serious, but whether he had even a majority of Republicans in Florida who would go along with it, I'm doubtful. I mean, the Constitution of Florida requires that if an election is within a half a point or a point, I forget which it is, then there has to be an automatic recount. That's why the state Supreme Court ordered a recount. It comported with the Florida Constitution. And the 10th Amendment says that basically states get to run their own elections. So when the Supreme Court interfered in the Florida election by stopping the recount because, and if you read the filings in Bush v. Gore, because complainant George W. Bush will be irreparably harmed if the recount continues, end quote. When they interfered and stopped that recount, they basically handed the election to George W. Bush. And we learned later when the count was recounted by the New York Times and the Washington Post that, in fact, Al Gore won Florida by any measure. The original count was light by quite a few thousand votes, it turns out. So,
but, Tom, this is something we got to take on. That's not my main question, Tom. It's related to it, though. My main point I wish to make is if you had a change of the legislature, they would change that law in a heartbeat. And the point I tried to make to the people of the national popular vote is their strategy. They just are totally dependent on having the legislatures change the law. Gore versus Bush, the point was they would change the law in a heartbeat. There are enough states, Tom, that you could use the initiative, like Michigan just did about gerrymandering, okay? There are enough states, if they were to have an initiative, they could put it on the ballot and the legislature wouldn't change the law at the last minute. I don't believe in wasting my time. I want this to be...
So you're suggesting that this should be done by ballot initiative rather than by legislatures. Only about half the states allow for ballot initiatives. Mostly states west of the Mississippi, but only about half of them. But your point is well taken, Terry. I don't disagree with you. Nikki in Joplin, Missouri. Hey, Nikki, what's up?
Well, how are you, Tom?
Hey, Nikki. Oh, yeah, we've got about. Oh, Nikki, I'm gonna put you back on hold because we're hitting the break. I didn't realize that I was that close to the break. I thought I had another minute. And I'll pick you up on the other side of the break. It is 49 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Nikki in Joplin, Missouri. Hey, Nikki, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. This is Nikki Oliver. I'm from Joplin, Missouri, and I just wanted to give you a little hope here and your viewers. I'm older. I'm a senior citizen, and we're a lot more progressive than people give us, credit for. And
I agree. And senior citizens know what Medicare is.
Right. And if they knew that they're trying to take it away, really, if they had the right information, not progressives, the Republicans. But I think people in red states like where I come from, the ones that don't like Trump are so afraid, that they will go middle, in the primaries because they're so afraid he'll get elected again. And I think the Democrats all should bond that I'm a more progressive Democrat. There's a lot of young people even around Joplin that like Bernie and Warren, but what do you think about? I think Trump will turn on Bernie, and it might be reverse psychology, with Trump.
Yeah, I think that, in 1980, the Republican Party changed their strategy and went to a base strategy. They were going to reach out to people who were fervent. Ronald Reagan campaigned on ending abortion, overturning Roe v. Wade. He campaigned on overturning Brown versus Board of Education, the 1954 Supreme Court decision that desegregated schools. He campaigned on radically cutting taxes. He campaigned on the stuff that previously had been considered the fringe of the Republican Party. And he won. And ever since then, every Republican has run a base campaign rather than trying to cater to the center. But all this time, Democrats have been trying to cater to the center ever since, George McGovern went down in flames in '72. And I think it's been a huge mistake. And I think George McGovern's candidacy in '72 was very, very flawed. He was a flawed candidate. Ed Muskie would have been a much stronger candidate, but Richard Nixon and Chuck Colson took him out in the primary because they wanted to run against McGovern. And then McGovern had Tom Eagleton as his VP, and it turned out Tom Eagleton had electroshock therapy for depression. And it was just screwed up. People say now, they go, if you get Bernie, you're going to have McGovern again, and we'll get wiped out. No, Bernie is not McGovern, and this is not 1972. I think that if we have a candidate that activates the base. Nikki, thank you for the call. I think if we have a candidate who activates the base, who gets people enthusiastic, we have a solid chance of winning. If we have another kind of Hillary Clinton candidate where, there's a lot of people who are really excited about the possibility, the historic possibility of a woman as president. There was a lot of that kind of energy with Hillary Clinton. But with regard to policy, there was virtually no enthusiasm. And so a lot of people just said, I'm not going to vote. And, as Pocan points out, hundreds of thousands, 200,000 people in Wisconsin who voted for Barack Obama in 2012 didn't show up in 2016. And Trump won Wisconsin by 20,000 votes. So That's my biggest concern about Bloomberg, frankly, is that he's not going to activate young people. Now, he has been throwing enormous amounts of money into climate change work, and I salute him for that, and into anti-gun violence work. But if that's going to be enough to overcome his Republican past, basically, I'm skeptical. But we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I'll vote for whatever Democrat. If it's Bill the Cat, I'll vote for it. Megan in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Megan, what's up?
Hi, can you hear me?
I hear you now, yes.
All right, excellent. Thanks for taking my call. Hey, I am one of the many Bernie supporters who voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016 because I understood that primary season was over and that we needed to vote for a Democrat in the general. And now this ad by Bloomberg today is attacking Sanders supporters is terrifying to me because I actively go online and I'm trying to spread love. I get the narrative that the Russian bots are pushing about Bernie supporters, but many of us are very level-headed, care very deeply about our democracy that is being dismantled before us. And so I just wanted to make the point that when you were talking about studying bullies and talking about Barr, I think it's really important that us as progressives have a reckoning in the party because we've got to figure out how to bridge the gap with the moderates that are doing, again, his Bloomberg's ad, it wasn't even substantive on policy issues the book that you read from earlier.
That's because you can't attack Bernie on substance. Yeah, you just can't do it. And websites like DU and others that are constantly attacking Bernie are simply, in my opinion, spreading Russian disinformation. They're spreading these bots, and it's not a good thing or a healthy thing at all. So thanks for the call, Megan. Greg in Issaquah, Washington. Hey, Greg, what's up? Last minute.
Quick question. Yeah. If the election, the presidential election, comes down and swing states go against the current president, what kind of authority does the president have to assert that millions of illegal voters caused him to lose the election by tipping these states and suspend it? Well, I'm just curious about what he can do.
He has no authority to do it, but I absolutely predict he will do that. And this, Bill Maher keeps asking this question. I keep asking this question, and it's a question we need to ask of politicians. The Democratic Party needs to be ready for when Trump loses the election and then declares that he fraudulently lost and that he really won. And he gets the bikers out in the streets, and he gets you think Bernie bros are bad? Have you seen a Trump rally, a Nazi rally? I mean, this is the real danger. And it's a real danger that he'll refuse to leave, and Washington, D.C. becomes the spark that starts some sort of a civil war, a second civil war in the United States. And Trump is perfectly willing to take the country down along with himself, just like Adolf Hitler did. I mean, it's just, and he wasn't the only guy who did this. So anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. Once again tonight, if you are in the Bay Area, I will be in Berkeley at the Hillside Club, 2286 Cedar Street in Berkeley. More information and tickets at the door or at thomhartmann.com. Be there, be square, tag You're It, and tell your friends where to find progressive media like AM 910 right here in San Francisco.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.